March 20th, 1995, Tokyo subway, rush hour. A man in a dark suit drops plastic bags on the train floor and walks away. Just another forgotten commuter, or so it seems. The liquid inside begins to seep out. A sweet chemical smell fills the air. Passengers start coughing, then gasping, then collapsing. In 13 minutes, 13 people will be dead. Thousands more will be hospitalized. But here's what will haunt Japan forever. The man who orchestrated this wasn't some foreign terrorist cell. He wasn't a political extremist or a lone wolf madman. He was a nearly blind guru who convinced thousands of followers that mass murder was the path to enlightenment. This is a story of how one man's delusions of divinity brought chemical warfare to the Japan. On a small farm in Kumamoto Prefecture on March 2, 1955, Chizuo Matsumoto was born, the fourth of 9 children in a peasant family that could barely sustain itself, but fate had reserved a burden for this boy that would forever shape his worldview. He was born with infantile glaucoma, a condition that would leave him practically blind from his first days of life. When Chizuo turned 6, his parents made a decision that would change the course of his life. They sent him to a boarding school for the blind in Kumamoto. Away from family protection, the boy had to quickly learn how to survive in a hostile environment, and that's exactly what he did. But not in the way his parents expected. Classmates who lived with him during that time tell a disturbing story. Chizuo wasn't just physically aggressive, but displayed an early and frightening ability to manipulate others. He intimidated weaker students, stole their money, and always found a way to escape the consequences. After graduating from junior college in 1975, Matsumoto decided to follow what seemed like a respectable path. He studied acupuncture and opened his own clinic. To many who knew him, it appeared he had finally found a legitimate purpose in life. But this impression didn't last long. It soon became clear that Chizuo hadn't abandoned his old manipulative habits. He had simply refined them. He was caught practicing medicine without a license and, worse still, selling fake remedies to people desperate for healing. It was during the early 1980s, perhaps driven by his failures in medicine and the growing weight of his deceptions, that Matsumoto turned his attention to something completely different: religion. He dove deep into the study of Buddhist and Hindu traditions, absorbing knowledge that he would soon begin to twist for his own purposes. And then, in 1987, came the final transformation. Chizuo Matsumoto officially ceased to exist. In his place emerged Shoko Asahara, a name carefully chosen to sound more spiritual, more mystical. It was the last step in creating a new identity, one that would soon become synonymous with terror and manipulation on an unimaginable scale. The blind boy who once stole from schoolmates had become something far more dangerous, a religious leader with an insatiable hunger for power and control. In 1984, armed with his new spiritual identity and a growing confidence in his manipulative abilities, Asahara established a small yoga and meditation class called Aum Shinsen no Kai in a modest rented room in Shibuya, Tokyo. It seemed innocent enough, just another wellness group in a city full of them. The group initially attracted exactly who Asahara was hoping for: young professionals hungry for meaning in their increasingly materialistic world. These weren't desperate patients seeking fake cures. These were educated, successful people searching for spiritual fulfillment and alternative approaches to life. They had money, influence, and most importantly, they were willing to believe. What made Asahara's approach so insidious was how he wove together legitimate spiritual traditions with his own grandiose claims. His teachings became a carefully crafted tapestry that combined elements of Tibetan Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity, traditions that his followers respected and trusted. But hidden within this seemingly profound mixture were Asahara's own prophecies, and more dangerously, his claims of supernatural powers. He boldly declared that he had achieved enlightenment and possessed abilities that defied the laws of physics, levitation, clairvoyance, and other miraculous powers. To support these claims, he distributed photographs showing himself in various meditation poses, some appearing to capture him floating impossibly above the ground. Whether through clever photography or simple staging, these images became powerful tools of persuasion for those desperate to believe in something greater than themselves. Throughout the 1980s, what had started as a small meditation group began to swell with believers. The growth was steady but undeniable, and by 1987, Asahara felt confident enough to rebrand his movement. Aum Shinsen no Kai disappeared, replaced by the far more ambitious Aum Shinrikyo, which translated to Supreme Truth in English. The name change wasn't just cosmetic, it signaled Asahara's growing ambitions and his belief that he possessed the ultimate spiritual authority. But the real breakthrough came through persistence and political maneuvering. After years of lobbying, Asahara achieved what he had been working toward all along. In 1989, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government officially recognized Aum Shinrikyo as a religious corporation. This wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a shield that provided legal protections and valuable tax benefits that would prove crucial to everything that followed. The official recognition proved to be the catalyst Asahara had been waiting for. With legitimacy came trust, and with trust came unprecedented growth. By the early 1990s, his small meditation group had transformed into something unrecognizable. Aum Shinrikyo now boasts approximately 10,000 members across Japan and commanded an estimated net worth of over 500 million yen. While Asahara was nursing his political wounds, a lawyer named Tsutsumi Sakamoto was quietly building a case that threatened everything the cult leader had worked for. Sakamoto represented desperate families trying to rescue their relatives from Aum's grip. And by 1989, he was spearheading a class action lawsuit alleging fraud and illegal confinement. For a man already spiraling into paranoia, Sakamoto represented the ultimate threat, someone with both the legal expertise and moral authority to expose Aum's true nature. On November 4, 1989, the Sakamoto family, Tsutsumi, his wife Satoko, and their 14-month-old son, Tatsuhiko, simply vanished from their Yokohama apartment. What authorities initially treated as a missing persons case would remain a chilling mystery for years. But the truth was far more horrific than anyone imagined. 6 senior Aum members had broken into the family's home the night before, strangling both parents before killing their infant son. The bodies were buried in separate locations across 3 different prefectures, scattered to prevent discovery. It was methodical, calculated, and utterly ruthless, the perfect crime that stayed hidden for years. This wasn't just murder, it was Asahara's first successful elimination of a threat, and the flawless cover-up sent a terrifying message to his followers. Their leader was capable of anything, and nothing would stop him from protecting his empire. In 1990, drunk on his own success and convinced of his divine authority, Asahara made a fateful decision. He would bring his message directly to the Japanese people through politics. He formed the Shinrito, in English, Truth Party, with 24 other Aum members and launched what would become one of the most bizarre political campaigns in Japanese history, complete with singing, dancing, and white-robed followers parading through Tokyo's streets. The results were catastrophic. Asahara managed only 1,783 votes out of 500,000 cast in his district. Not a single Aum candidate won their race. For a man who claimed divine enlightenment, this crushing rejection by the very people he sought to save was more than just a political defeat. It was a psychological catastrophe. Former members later described how this humiliation transformed Asahara into something far more dangerous. His paranoia exploded, his violence escalated, and his conviction that Japanese society had rejected salvation itself became an obsession. As media scrutiny intensified and legal challenges mounted, the man who had once sought power through persuasion began to consider far darker methods. In 1992, while Japanese authorities remained oblivious to the Sakamoto murders, Asahara spotted an unprecedented opportunity in the chaos of post-Soviet collapse. Russia was reeling from economic devastation and social upheaval, the perfect breeding ground for his apocalyptic message. What happened next would transform Aum from a murderous cult into something resembling a private army. The Russian expansion exceeded even Asahara's wildest expectations. Within months, Aum claimed over 30,000 Russian members and, more crucially, cultivated connections with desperate government officials. These weren't just diplomatic relationships, they were transactions that gave Aum access to military equipment and training that would have been impossible to obtain in Japan. Soon, Japanese authorities would discover the terrifying scope of Aum's militarization, attempts to purchase helicopters, automatic weapons, and most chillingly, nuclear weapons technology. Aum compounds in both Japan and Russia became paramilitary training centers, where followers learned not just meditation, but warfare. This wasn't random violence anymore. It was preparation. Asahara's teachings had evolved into pure apocalyptic prophecy, predicting an imminent World War III between Japan and the United States. In his twisted vision, only Aum members would survive the nuclear holocaust he was now actively preparing to help create. By 1993, Asahara's apocalyptic delusions had crystallized into a concrete plan of mass destruction. If he couldn't acquire nuclear weapons, he would create his own instruments of death. Aum began systematic recruitment of scientists and technicians, including Masami Tsuchiya, a chemistry master's degree holder from the prestigious Tsukuba University. Hidden away at Aum's compound in Kamikuishiki, nestled at the base of Mount Fuji, these scientists began their deadly work. Their primary obsession became sarin, the same nerve agent that Nazi Germany had developed during World War II. The group's ambitions didn't stop at chemical weapons. They experimented with biological agents, attempting to cultivate anthrax and botulism toxins that could kill on an even more massive scale. Though their biological weapons program proved less successful, the chemical weapons research was advancing rapidly. On the night of June 27, 1994, Asahara's twisted vision finally became reality. The target wasn't random, it was coldly calculated. 3 judges living in Matsumoto, Nagano Prefecture were expected to rule against Aum in a real estate dispute. Rather than accept legal defeat, Asahara chose to demonstrate the ultimate power, the ability to kill from a distance. Using a refrigerated truck as their weapon of delivery, Aum members released vaporized sarin into the quiet residential neighborhood. As families slept, the results were devastating. 8 people dead, 144 injured. Among the victims was the wife of one of the targeted judges and innocent neighbors who had committed no crime other than living too close to Asahara's enemies. In a cruel twist that revealed the attack's perfect execution, police initially suspected Yoshiyuki Kono, a resident whose own wife had been poisoned in the attack. For months, this grieving husband endured intense media scrutiny and public harassment while the real perpetrators watched from the shadows, undoubtedly pleased by how completely they had covered their tracks. For Asahara, Matsumoto wasn't just revenge, it was a successful field test. His chemical weapons worked exactly as designed, and authorities had no idea who was responsible. The rehearsal was complete, and now it was time for the main performance. By early 1995, the walls were closing in. Multiple police investigations had begun connecting Aum to various disappearances and suspicious activities, particularly the kidnapping and murder of Kiyoshi Kariya, whose only crime was searching for his sister after she escaped from Aum's control. The net was tightening, and Asahara knew it. On March 19th, everything changed. Police had scheduled massive simultaneous raids on all Aum facilities for March 22nd. Raids that would expose the chemical weapons, the murders, and end Asahara's reign of terror. But Asahara had one final card to play. Infiltrators within Japan's own self-defense forces warned him of the impending raids 3 days in advance. Cornered and facing inevitable arrest, Asahara made the most desperate and dangerous decision of his life. Rather than surrender or attempt escape, he ordered a preemptive strike designed to bring down the entire Japanese government. The target was Tokyo's subway system during morning rush hour, specifically the lines that carried government officials to work each day. This wasn't just another attack. This was Asahara's final bid for absolute power. If he could create enough chaos, prevent the raids, and cripple the government, perhaps Aum could rise from the ashes to rule Japan itself. On March 20th, 1995, at the height of Tokyo's morning rush hour, Asahara's apocalyptic vision reached its horrific climax. 5 Aum members, armed with plastic bags of liquid sarin and sharpened umbrellas, boarded separate trains across 3 major subway lines. Their mission was simple: puncture the bags, release the deadly vapor, and escape before the chaos began. The choreography of terror was precise. On the Chiyoda line, former Dr. Ikuo Hayashi calmly placed 2 sarin packages on the floor of a southbound train at 7:59 a.m., punctured them with his umbrella, and walked away. On the Marunouchi line, Ken Ichi Hiroshi's attack would kill 1 passenger and injure 350 others, while his partner, Masato Yokoyama's less effective puncturing still affected 200 victims. But it was the Hibiya line that witnessed the deadliest horror. Toru Toyoda's assault killed 1 and injured 532 others, while Yasuo Hayashi, volunteering for extra risk, carried 3 sarin packages instead of 2. As the odorless, invisible death spread through the cramped subway cars, passengers began collapsing, convulsing, foaming at the mouth. The true horror was in the confusion. Unaware they were dealing with chemical weapons, subway workers and first responders continued normal operations for precious minutes, breathing in the deadly vapors and becoming victims themselves. In those chaotic moments, as Tokyo's underground transformed into a scene from Asahara's apocalyptic nightmares, 13 people died and thousands more were injured. Just 2 days after Tokyo's underground nightmare, on March 22nd, police raids proceeded as planned across Aum facilities. What they discovered defied comprehension: an entire infrastructure of death that made the subway attacks look like merely the opening act of a far grander horror show. The scale was staggering: tons of chemicals, sophisticated laboratory equipment, and detailed blueprints for attacks that would have dwarfed the subway assault. Documents revealed Asahara's true ambitions: poisoning Tokyo's entire water supply and bombing government buildings. The subway attack wasn't his masterpiece, it was just his announcement that he was ready for total war. But the man who had orchestrated such methodical terror proved surprisingly cowardly when cornered. While over 400 of his followers were rounded up and arrested, Asahara spent nearly 2 months hiding like a rat in a secret room within his own compound. The self-proclaimed enlightened master was finally dragged from a cramped space between walls on May 16, 1995, a pathetic end for someone who had claimed godlike powers. Perhaps most telling was how quickly his empire of believers collapsed. Faced with real consequences, many Aum members eagerly cooperated with authorities, providing detailed accounts of their leader's crimes and the group's inner workings. The man who had commanded absolute loyalty through fear and manipulation discovered that both evaporated the moment his followers realized he couldn't protect them. The apocalypse Asahara had promised never came. Instead, he found himself in a small cell, facing the very human justice he had tried so desperately to escape through delusions of divinity. When Asahara's trial began in 1996, the man who had once commanded thousands of followers had one last act of manipulation to perform. Faced with 13 charges, including murder and attempted murder for the subway attacks, the Matsumoto Incident, and the Sakamoto family murders, he retreated into perhaps his most audacious lie yet, claiming to be in a perpetual state of meditation. For 8 long years, he maintained this charade. The former master manipulator rarely spoke to the court, showed no remorse for his victims, and continued to insist on his innocence even as the evidence of his crimes mounted around him. It was a final performance for an audience that was no longer buying his act. In February 2004, reality finally caught up with Shoko Asahara. The court sentenced him to death by hanging, along with 12 other senior Aum members. The Japanese Supreme Court upheld the sentence in 2006, and after exhausting all appeals, the man who had once claimed divine powers faced the most human of endings. On July 6, 2018, Chizuo Matsumoto, the blind boy who stole from classmates, the failed politician, the false prophet, the mass murderer, was executed. The apocalypse he had promised his followers never came, but his own personal ending was swift and final. The Tokyo subway attacks fundamentally changed Japan's approach to domestic security and religious oversight. The government enacted new legislation to monitor potentially dangerous religious organizations and completely revised emergency response procedures to address chemical and biological threats that had previously been considered unlikely. While Aum Shinrikyo was officially dissolved as a religious corporation, several successor organizations emerged. The largest, known as Aleph, continues to operate under strict government surveillance. As of 2020, these groups maintained approximately 1,650 members across Japan and Russia, though their activities remain heavily monitored. The human cost of the attacks extends far beyond the immediate casualties. Many survivors continue to experience long-term health effects from sarin exposure, including chronic respiratory problems and neurological symptoms. The psychological impact affected not only direct victims, but also their families and the broader Tokyo community, fundamentally altering how residents viewed public safety. The Aum Shinrikyo case serves as a sobering reminder of how charismatic leadership combined with extremist ideology can lead to devastating consequences.